bioethics,
law, euthanasia,
consumerism,
politics, terrorism,
globalization,
religion,
migrant population,
interfaith, drug addiction.
So let me begin with something that we are familiar with, which is the issue of pluralism. Okay. Within pluralism, we can identify the trend of globalization. Globalization has left no country untouched, and nowadays, entire societies today are keenly aware of what's happening around the world through improved forms of communications and transport. I was watching a BBC documentary the other day. It was entitled City in the Sky. It's a 3-part series, and it was an in-depth look into the global aviation industry. So what aviation experts have estimated is that at any one point in time, there are 1 million people in the skies. I mean, sitting in the airplane seats, of course, with all their luggages and so on. So when you have 1 million people in the skies, that is equivalent to a small city. At any one point, in any 1 second, there are people disembarking and people embarking onto new journeys and so forth. And this is the world that we live in today. People from all over the world can visit other parts of the world, and they are doing so, to the extent that we are beginning to see and learn from one another. Yeah. At the same time, we experience this kind of cultural pluralism, which means a cultural diversity. While that is not new, because of globalization and the increase in our population growth, it has become a much more common and intense experience for most people. We are living practically cheek by jowl with somebody else, with somebody that is not familiar to us, either culturally, religiously, or socially. And so there is a need for us to learn how to live with one another in the midst of this wide diversity of views, customs, and beliefs. And in particular, when it comes to differing faiths, because we get into contact with different religions, this has also challenged the adherents of their own religions to have to take a deeper look into what they believe in, and at the same time to explore how they should react to what we call the religious other. So we are no longer living in isolation. Most of the time we are in close proximity with somebody either that's different from us, and in this talk I'll focus on somebody who is different from us religiously, and how the Christian faith should help us to approach somebody of this faith. Within Christianity, the field of study that explores this area, how Christians should view other religions, is what we call the theology of religions. Short form is basically TOR. This is how it's commonly used in the field. Some of the questions that are addressed in this area include: is Jesus the only way to salvation? If so, what about the followers of other religions? Okay. And then, are the existence of other faiths providential? Providential in the sense that, are they part of God's plan for people to get to know Him? Okay. Since it is apparent that not everybody will have a chance to hear of Christianity. Okay. So to answer or to discuss this question, most theologians will utilize what we call a threefold paradigm, which I will describe as a soteriological pluralistic position, or inclusivistic position, and exclusivistic position. Okay? And the basic logic behind these three categories generally speaking, not just religious threefold typology, would be pluralism is the view that holds that one's own tradition is as good as any other tradition. Okay, this is very basic. Inclusivism basically says that one's tradition is better. It's not just as good, but it's better than other traditions. And exclusivism says that one's own tradition is the only good one. Okay? So when we come to Christianity, specifically, a Christian pluralist is someone who argues that the Christian faith is valid, but is as valid as any other religion in bringing one to salvation. So one tradition is as valid as any other tradition, and a Christian tradition is one among many. A Christian inclusivist would contend that while Christianity is better than other traditions, those other religions may also have a role to play in attaining salvation for their adherents, for their followers, albeit an inferior one. Okay. And finally, a Christian exclusivist believes that only the Christ found within the Christian faith can lead a person to salvation. Okay. So, broadly speaking, the terminology of pluralism, inclusivism, and exclusivism has been most widely used in this field. But at the same time, it is not, there has been some objections raised to the paradigm. So I will bring for discussion two main objections. And the first is terminological. Okay. There are people who don't like the term, especially the term exclusivism, okay, because it seems to connote a certain level of discrimination and intolerance towards other people. So they have proposed terms such as particularism, this is by Alistair McGrath, and restrictivism, this would be by John Sanders and Clark Pinnock. Okay. So our response would be, even though exclusivism may suggest a certain amount of narrow-mindedness, even if you change the term, given the scandalous nature of the gospel, any other chosen term will ultimately be viewed negatively by contemporary culture. Okay. If you change the term to particularism, after a while people might not like the term particularism, and then does that mean you have to change it again? At the same time, exclusivism is not really that bad, right? If you are married, you must remain exclusive to one person. If you are going for the Great Singapore Sale, you are looking for an exclusive sale. So exclusivity is not necessarily bad in itself. Okay. The second objection, the second main objection to the typology is a more substantive one, and that is the criteriological one. Okay. Not all theologians agree that the question of salvation is the most crucial one for a religion. Okay. Some theologians would argue that religions should be more concerned about other matters like global warming, ecology, world peace, and other humanitarian issues. Okay? So the call would be, let us not be too fixated upon the question of salvation. There are other issues that religions should deal with. Okay? So our response, I think, should be, while there are legitimate concerns proper to each faith, and those concerns raised are legitimate, I want to emphasize that the core of the Christian faith concerns the issue of salvation. Okay. And the reason for this assertion is simply this. When Christ walked on earth, he performed many acts of healing out of love and compassion. But there was one act that he did which could not be accomplished by anyone else, which was to die an atoning sacrifice on the cross. Okay. That shows us that this is a central issue in the Christian faith. At the same time, it doesn't mean that we are unconcerned about other ethical issues. but simply because of the irreplaceable role of the cross. So faith should not be turned into salvific monism. In other words, we should not turn the Christian faith into concern only about one issue, salvation, simply because our human existence is much broader, is much more multifaceted. And so there remains a need for Christian acts of charity, Christian acts of compassion at both the corporate and the individual levels. So to summarize, salvation is not the only issue, we agree, but it is a central issue because of what Christ has done for us on the cross. So while there have been many attempts, and I should emphasize there have been many attempts to redefine the typology, to take away the central issue of salvation, I would argue that the issue of salvation should continue to be determinative for the theology of religions. Okay? And so we shall now proceed to examine the main positions of soteriological pluralism. Soteriological basically means pertaining to salvation. Inclusivism and exclusivism. Okay. What is pluralism, or what is soteriological pluralism? As I said, it holds that besides Christianity, the other world religions are true and valid in their understanding of the divine and their appropriation of salvation. Okay. So there are other religions that are just as valid as the Christian faith. There are a few misconceptions about pluralism, so let me just point them out. Contrary to popular perception, pluralists do not suggest that all religions are valid paths to God. Okay. Not all religions are valid paths to God. Why? Because this might inadvertently include cults or groups with deviant religious practices. So they refer generally to what we recognize as the world religions. Okay. So for example, about 2 decades ago, there was a sarin gas attack in the Tokyo subway, and that was by a cult group, a religious cult group. No pluralist that I know of would say that these people's religion are valid and headed towards the same direction as the other religions. So we have to be careful. They are also very careful. They are not saying that all religions, anybody can claim to be a religious leader, and in our human history we have encountered many examples of people who misuse religion for their own purposes. The other misconception about pluralism is that they suggest that all religions are equal paths to God. Pluralists do not suggest that all religions are equal paths to God. Because to suggest that they are equal means that they possess an ability to measure the efficacy of each and every religion, and that is impossible to verify. Okay. So the assertion by pluralists are much more nuanced. They would argue that the various religions lead to the same transcendental reality using their own salvific mechanisms. Okay. So some might take a longer way, some might take a shorter way, but they all end up at the same place, so to speak. To say that they are equal paths is an assertion that cannot be verified. In other words, you have to be a follower of one religion and then come back somehow and try out another religion and then come back and do a third religion and say that they are all equal paths, which is not possible. Okay? Now, who are its main proponents? The most notable theologians would be John Hick and Paul Nitter. Paul Nitter is actually a very interesting case because he's actually a Roman Catholic theologian. And Roman Catholicism officially frowns upon pluralism. So Paul Nitter is in a strange position where he propounds pluralism in a university setting, but his own church disagrees with his position. Other theologians include Wilfred Kenshaw Smith, Alan Race. Alan Race actually was one of those who came up with this typology in the first place. And Perry Smith Luco, who is a newer, younger theologian taking on the torch for pluralism. Okay. But I want to focus upon John Hick, because John Hick's ideas have remained influential despite all the many other variations after him. So we will use his ideas to try to understand what is an example of traditional pluralism. John Hick argues basically for a Copernican revolution. Okay. Before Copernicus, most people believed that the planets and the sun revolve around the earth. Okay. So phenomenologically, we see that the sun seems to revolve around the earth. But Copernicus came along and with empirical data and observation changed all that. So John Hick argues that in the same way, traditional Christianity has always seen that the only path to salvation is through Christ, kind of like through the earth. Huh? But if a Copernican revolution would occur in Christianity, and if God the Father is to be seen as a true Savior, in other words, that there is the existence of the Son, then Christ can become one among many Saviors. Christ revolves around the Father. He leads people to the Father. But there could be other Saviors around the Father. The Father could have chosen other means of salvation. Okay. Subsequently, he modified his position slightly when he realized that he had assumed that the common goal of all religions was to seek a divine person or divine reality. That would have ruled out non-theistic religions, such as Buddhism. So in the 1980s, he reproposed a conception of ultimate reality as what he called the real. The real, which does not possess any personal or non-personal characteristics. When I hear the word the real now, I cannot help but stop, but think of, I think it was Peter who asked Katniss. This is in the Hunger Games. And it was a very tragic story where Peter has been brainwashed and he can't even tell whether it's true or not true. So he asked Katniss the question. And then after that, he had to ask, real or not real? So that is what real means to us. That is something real. Huh? So John Hick now argues that behind every religion is not a God, but something real, a transcendental being or reality. Okay. At the same time, pluralists accept that Jesus Christ is unique. Okay? But they reinterpret what the word unique means. So, for example, John Cobb sees uniqueness as something that can be applied to any non-repeatable event. So the Christ event is as unique in the same sense as Buddhism is unique and every other person is unique. Okay? Paul Nitter also interprets the uniqueness of Christ to suggest that he is a distinct Savior rather than the only Savior. Okay. Now, before I move on to inclusivism, I want to talk a bit about relativism. Okay. There has been some confusion between pluralism and relativism. Some Christians have charged pluralists of being relativists. And John Hick has come out often to deny such charges. And I think his defense is valid. Hickian pluralism is not relativism. Now, what's the difference between relativism and pluralism? To use the aphorism for pluralism, which is that many roads lead to Rome. Pluralists believe in two of these elements, that there are many roads and that they all lead to Rome. Relativists believe that there are many roads, but there's no Rome. Okay? So relativists do not have, they do not hold to an ultimate reality behind all the various roads. They accept that each road is valid in of itself and each destination is different from itself. So in that sense, I think it would be unfair to call pluralists relativists, because pluralists are actually absolutists. They do believe in an absolute. Whether or not it is the real or God or some other transcendental reality, they do believe that all religions, the major religions, will head towards that direction. Okay. When it comes to relativists, I would consider a more recent theologian by the name of S. Mark Heim, H-E-I-M, who is professor of theology at Andover Newton Theological School, one of the oldest graduate schools in the US. S. Mark Heim advocates what he calls a theology of multiple religious ends. In other words, he argues that Christians should accept that every religion has their own and valid ending point, which I think is closer to relativism than John Hick's pluralism. Okay? Just to say a bit further about S. Mark Heim. S. Mark Heim ultimately attempts to construct his theology of religions based on the doctrine of the Trinity. And I think this is where the project fails. Okay? Because the whole idea behind relativism is one key word: non-convergence. So all the religions do not converge. So to claim, as S. Mark Heim has done, that Christianity itself and its core doctrine of the Trinity contains resources that can speak about the religious ends of other religions is to smuggle in a sort of convergence through the back door, which I think is not valid. So if you are relativist, then let's be a real relativist all the way, true and true. Not that I'm suggesting that you should be one, I'm just saying that, logically speaking. Now, what is inclusivism? Inclusivism is the view, is committed to one religion, but it argues that salvation can be found in fragmentary forms within other faiths. And then in those other faiths, if they have conflicting claims with the one faith that you believe to be superior, then they will be judged by criteria based on the one true religion. Now, this might seem a bit sketchy to most of you, but let me just point out, first of all, there is a main difference here with pluralism. Inclusivism or inclusivists do not believe that the other religions are independent means to salvation. That would be the position of the pluralist. Proponents would include the Catholic theologian Karl Rahner and the Protestant theologians Clark Pinnock and Paul E. Sanders. So most Catholic theologians now accept this view. In fact, I would say that the official position of the Roman Catholic Church would be a form of inclusivism. And this would be mainly due to the influence of Rahner and his view of anonymous Christians. Although Rahner has expressed that during the Second Vatican Council, not all of his views were taken up. But let's look at what it means to be, or what the concept of anonymous Christians mean. In Rahner's view, it is apparent that not everyone in the whole world will have a chance to hear God's gospel or his church in their lifetime. Therefore, he argues that in God's providence, the non-Christian religions, the other religions, can be channels of his salvific grace until their followers have the opportunity to encounter the gospel. Once they have encountered the gospel, their own religion loses their legitimacy. In other words, because they have now heard of the name of Christ and the church, they should not continue in their old ways. At the same time, those other non-Christian followers will be saved through the work of Christ. And therefore, they could be called, or they could be known as anonymous Christians. So they didn't know that they were Christians, but in the end, God accepted them as Christians. Okay, I've mentioned that Rahner's view has been taken up by the Second Vatican Council. This was held from 1962 to 1965, which was 4 years. So church meetings are always very long. 4 years is especially long. So if you have anything less than 4 years, you don't have grounds to complain. Okay. In one of there are 16 documents that were promulgated after the Second Vatican Council, and there are 4 constitutions. That means these 4 are the pillars of the Catholic of the Council. And Lumen Gentium, literally meaning light to the Gentiles. Its official name is the Dogmatic Constitution of the Church. In Article 16, it states, "Those also can attain to salvation who through no fault of their own do not know the gospel of Christ or his church, yet they sincerely seek God and moved by grace, strive by their deeds to do his will, as it is known to them through the dictates of conscience." Okay. Basically what Article 16 says is that for those people who do not have, or what we call the non-evangelized, yet based on whatever light they have received through their own religions, if they have tried to seek God sincerely, then coming back to the first sentence, they also can attain to salvation. That would be the inclusivist position. In the same article, it asserts, the plan of salvation also includes those who acknowledge the Creator. In the first place, among these are the Mohammedans, those professing to hold the faith of Abraham, along with us adore the one and merciful God. So Vatican II officially put forth the position that people of the Islamic faith are actually worshipping the same God as Christians, and therefore they are included in the plan of salvation.